This is a bonus episode of the WTF Bach podcast. This is a bonus episode. Aren't you so lucky? This is a bonus episode. Bonus episode of the WTF Bach podcast.
WTF Bach, thank you for tuning in. Have you been listening to the 3 albums I released in the spring of 2024? I know it's a lot to ask. Not 1 new album, but 3. But hey, it's either release 3 albums for 8 years in a row or release 1 album for 24 years in a row. So can you commit to a quarter century of this podcast? Yes, I thought you could. With the death of physical albums, we lost a few good things. Namely, I feel like we lost program notes. I, probably like many of you, used to sit and read through the program notes while listening to the albums, and I learned a lot. So how are we going to have that experience today? Why, by listening to these performers' commentaries of mine. So I'm going to play for you now the entirety of the album, Volume 2. And I'm going to speak over it, talk about what's going on in the piece, talking about what's going on in my head, etc. We had this maybe a couple months ago with Volume 1, so here's Volume 2. Now, Volume 2 in my complete Bach works covers the 4 original compositions for the so-called lute. But if you've been following along on my YouTube channel, you know this is probably meant to be the lute harpsichord, a wonderful instrument built like a giant lute turned on its side with gut strings and leather plectrums. I'll talk about it during the album. Played with a keyboard. The repertoire, some of my favorite, personally, is often neglected by pianists, but I think that probably won't be the case for as long as our collective Bach knowledge continues to grow. We will see this repertoire as keyboard pieces soon enough. The instrument, as you'll hear in the album, sounds very much like a guitar with a harpsichord release action. And it is. It's sort of the modern lute harpsichord that I and producer Aaron Ross at Yamaha helped create, and I think you'll enjoy it. So if you want to download the album, if you want to download the performer's commentary, I'll leave a link in the episode to where you can do that, every place you can stream it. In the meantime, I promise to be Bach here with some new episodes. I thought I would never do that pun, but I did. Okay, I'm taking it back. In the meantime, I promise to be back here with some new episodes, more puzzle canons, and talk about some of who Bach's critics were, who was alive and about in the 1700s saying, ugh, this Bach guy's so overrated. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Performer's Commentary. These are 4 original compositions for so-called lute. Now the question, which I will answer over the next few tracks, is what's with this instrument? What does lute mean? As for this prelude, its earliest copy appears after 1727. According to the title of the only source, it is to be played on a lute. It says, for the lute. We can imagine it very similar to the first prelude in the Well-Tempered Clavier, other preludes that are simply arpeggios, improvisations, chord progressions. And with this small introduction, let's go on. This is the absolutely lovely suite in C minor, BWV 997. It is a late work. The earliest copy is between 1738 and 1741. This is really Bach in his last decade of composition, the master fully in command of all the elements of composition, expression, everything flowing out of him with ease. The problem with this piece is that the upper staff is written an octave higher than we think it should sound, or at least most recordings, most performances of this piece perform, as I am doing here, the right hand an octave under what is written. In fact, there's only one recording that comes to mind, that is Robert Hill's, where he preserves the tones, literally. It is problematic because the range with the upper hand an octave higher is too high. for most instruments. In fact, the last movement of this piece can only be performed on a keyboard instrument, which brings us to the problem, what did Bach mean, or what do people mean in this era when they write lute? This record here, this sound, of course, is my tribute to the famous guitarists that play this music. I am not playing the guitar, though it sounds like it. I am actually playing on a keyboard here. We have created this sound, and this is not a sample. This is actually an acoustic instrument. A little bit of the music here. We come to a fermata. Bit of improvisation here. And the finale. Now here's the fugue. It's a da capo fugue, meaning the form is A, the A section, followed by a B section, and then da capo to the top. A section again. Now we will discuss the question of instrumentation, but of course, it might be more interesting to talk about the music. This is Bach. He's combined prelude and fugue and suite form. No other suite starts immediately with a prelude and a fugue and then has dance movements after. To follow this fugue is a saraband and then a jig. This record for me is like I said, the tribute album to the great guitarists who play this music. David Russell, Manuel Barrueco, Julian Bream, Eduardo Fernandez. These are records I've listened to of this music. But again, I am obviously not playing the guitar here. This is what is known as a Yamaha Reface keyboard. The sound is indeed flowing through the soundboard of an acoustic piano, often vibrating the piano strings on the inside, but you can send sounds through this soundboard that sound like a guitar. So actually, I and the producer created this sound to have the attack and the body of a guitar, but the release of a harpsichord. I should mention we're deep in the B section here. The B section of this music goes much faster. We'll see in the following piece in E-flat major a similar fugue, da capo fugue, A section somewhat slow, and then B section rather quick. We're hearing 16th notes, whereas the A section is mostly 8th notes. Now we're coming onto the conclusion of the B section. Very dramatic. And back to the A section there. So this idea of these fugues that, you could continue this fugue indefinitely. You could go straight back into the B section again after this A section. It sort of reminds us of the puzzle canons, the musical offering, the canons of the art of fugue, music that just goes on and on and on forever. Late Bach. Again, it's even hard to see the fugue here as a typical fugue. Some of the subjects come inverted, some of them don't, and it's not quite clear when they begin, when they stop. This is really the abstract, expressionist Bach. We just see here just fragments of the theme. Very exciting fugue, one of my favorites. Yeah, now that initial gesture there in the saraband, that to me, it's the closing of the same Matthew Passion. Wir setzen uns mit Tränen nieder. It's the same key, it's the same gesture, it's almost the same notes. I'll use this saraband here to talk about the issue of the lute harpsichord. What Bach probably meant with these compositions for lute was an instrument called the lute harpsichord. Now, what happened was, in Bach's lifetime, virtuosic lute playing was in decline, so rather than build up an entire school of virtuosic lute playing, it's easier to simply build an instrument that you can play like a keyboard that sounds like a lute. So that's what they did. Instead of the flat, shallow body of the harpsichord, they made these harpsichords that have bellies, big bellies like that of a lute. And instead of metallic strings, they lined the instrument like a lute with gut strings. And instead of using the plectrum of a quill, which would have been normal for a harpsichord, they used leather plectrums to mimic, indeed, the sounds of fingers plucking the lutes. And the consequence is that you have this instrument that sounds very much like a lute. Here's the second half, this lovely saraband starting in E-flat major. Now, of course, again, like the previous album, this is not me trying to be historically accurate, but rather to continue in the vein of that idea of Baroque musicians trying to imitate a sound. So this music has been so beloved by guitarists, possibly through a misunderstanding of what is meant when Bach writes lute. But as it is in the repertoire and in the hearts of all these great guitarists, this is me trying to sort of build a lute harpsichord that sounds like the classical guitar. So again, I'm playing on a piano here, on an acoustic piano. But if I didn't tell you that, you might think I've gotten really good at the guitar. We can even hear the tears of the last movement of the St. Matthew Passion here in these gestures. And this in the right hand. An absolutely gorgeous piece of music, this. Okay, now here's the problematic movement. This is the jig sampler, we could say. The sample, the simple, goes half as fast as the double, the double. That makes sense. But the problem is that whereas the right hand of every single movement thus far has been written an octave higher, the double seems to utilize the entire range. What does that mean? Again, Robert Hill is the only one that takes the interpretation literally. His brother builds lute harpsichord, so we should probably take his example, but most of us have to sort of make adjustments in the range during the doubla in order to accommodate the giant range. Anyways, we'll hear the double coming up very soon. Same harmony, but notes twice as fast. Right here. And as these shapes get lower and lower, this is where you have to sort of decide which phrase you're going to shift around the octave. Have a look at the manuscript. Very puzzling. In fact, I believe that the latest print of the Bachwerkverzeichnis book says that many hypotheses have been posited, but none have been really convincing. This is maybe the most beautiful prelude of all time. This is the Prelude Fugue and Allegro, BWV 998. The composition, I believe, probably stems from exactly the same time as the previous C minor suite. Some theories say middle of the 1740s. Some theories say toward the end of the 1730s. But in any case, we could say this is late Bach. The lute harpsichord was possibly in fashion, and Bach, needing to be in the business of music and know everything that was happening, said, I need these two compositions, one in C minor, one in the relative major, E flat major. And we have this gorgeous, expressive prelude. So simple. The left hand doing nothing. This is mostly just one line with a few dots here and there on the left hand. And like the late preludes, the late organ preludes, the late preludes in the second book of the Well-Tempered Clavier, Bach will take us deep into these caves of dark harmony. Listen to it. He's going to wind us into it right now. And we don't know how we'll get out. Until we have that magic chord. That magic chord. Such a special chord. It's not a complicated chord. It's not a chord you study in jazz theory, but the way in which it's applied. What a prelude. What a piece. And now the fugue. I'll talk more about the form in this fugue than I did in the previous one because we have more time. So, how many voices? Again, late Bach, it's not very strict. 2 voices will become 4 voices, will become 3, will become 5, without warning. Voices will come in inversion. Themes will be broken up into just a few notes, or they might be expanded into longer phrases. It makes analysis very superfluous. Now, we're approaching the end of the A section here, and as in the previous fugue, you'll hear the B section pick up and double in speed. Here's the B section here. Go. Notice we're at double speed, but where have the voices gone? Where's the counterpoint? It seems as if we just have simple accompaniment in the left hand and one long line in the right hand. Do we hear fragments of the theme in the left hand? Here's the theme sort of embedded into the middle. There's a theme sneakily placed in the middle voice. Here's maybe a section of one in the bass. Again, I think I used the term abstract expressionism, maybe incorrectly, but that's sort of what it seems like to me, you know? Fractions, fragments, bits of things scattered. Now these arpeggios here. Listen to the caverns, the caves of ice that he'll take us into. This one, F flat. Is the theme coming back? Are we out of the B section? Almost, it seems. I recognize these shapes. It seems like we're almost home. One final phrase here. Very lyrical. Indeed, we're coming out of it. And a seamless transition back to the A section. Here we are again. It's almost as if the theme is not the important part of the music in these late fugues of Bach. There's so much expression built around the theme. The theme is just sort of there, like the structure of a building, just holding up everything. And now the end of the A section, and this time with a fermata. Now this is an allegro, the only time I believe that Bach used this form, prelude then fugue, and he wasn't done, so he writes this last movement. It's in two sections. The A section will be repeated, as will the B section. B. Here's the A again. Again, as for the question of instrumentation, what is the proper instrument? It is an important question to answer, and a very interesting one. But once we've come up with the answer, and we've used that knowledge to inform whatever instrument we're playing upon, we should play on whatever instrument we want. Not all of us were born with golden lute harpsichords in our mouths. Here, in the second half, as you can hear just there, we have markings, piano and forte. Now that is very intriguing, because if indeed this work was written for a lute harpsichord, this implies a double manual lute harpsichord. Again, speaking of Keith Hill, the instrument builder, he has built a double manual lute harpsichord. love this line beginning here. We'll hear that again in the second half. Let's listen to the second half again. Here it is. This is forte, bottom manual. Here's piano, top manual. On the bottom manual again. I mentioned possibly in the first track that this is a record of 4 original compositions for lute. That means that there are other compositions for the lute harpsichord that are arrangements of his other works. The 5th cello suite, the 6th violin partita. We will see those in a further recording, but for now this is the end of the Prelude, Fugue and Allegro in E flat major BWV 998. Now this is, unlike the 2 previous suites, not a late work of Bach. This is the suite in E minor BWV 996. It has a very interesting story, which I will probably mention on a longer track, like maybe the Sarabande. I'll talk about the music here. It began with that almost flamenco-like passage. In fact, with the word passaggio, passage. Show off your chops. And now we're in this somewhat French overture section, dotted rhythms, like the invocation of the muse. Come to my aid with all of your powers of harmony, for I am about to embark on a fugue. Indeed, you can hear him getting ready for the fugue, and here it comes. We hear all the themes coming from top to bottom. Now we're at the bottom. We're climbing higher. And this phrase here, one of the most beloved in all the repertoire for me, this modulation. Pedal point on D. And in G major. I love that phrase. Now we're approaching the end. Amazing movement, amazing opening. Now the suite follows. Now this is the Allemande of the E minor lute suite. What is the story of this work? Well, this is what I love about musicology and sort of detective work, figuring out how a work came to be. We have an interesting document that says, on May 6th, 1715, Herr Bachen in Jena was paid for a Lautenwerk to be used at the court of Duke Ernst August of Saxony-Weimar. Which Bachen is this? Who was the Bachen in Jena? This is Johann Nicholas Bach, who was at the University of Jena, which is in Thuringia, which is not far from Weimar, where Bach was, which is the state of Thuringia is the Bach state. Johann Nicholas was Bach's second cousin, and he probably was involved in making this lute harpsichord. Now, Duke Ernst August of Saxony-Weimar bought the lute harpsichord. Who else was in Weimar at this time in 1715? Well, of course, J.S. Bach. He was working for the uncle of the said purchaser of this Lautenwerk harpsichord. This is possibly the origin here. This maybe was a new instrument, this new Lautenwerk harpsichord. Bach's employer's nephew buys this lute harpsichord, and Bach thinks, I need to try it out. So he writes this lute suite. This is my interpretation of this historical document. Now onto the music. I particularly love this imitation here. Upper voice, middle voice. And this climb from this deep harmony here to the bright harmony here. And then this cadence, lovely in thirds. A courant, one of the most unique courants in the repertoire. I can't think of a more unique, idiosyncratic courant. Extremely French. You could tell all the swing that it has. Very, very French style. As opposed to the, say, more mellifluous Italian corrente style. This is quite French. And these big scales here. The odd, pregnant pauses. And of course that hemiola, that very characteristic ending of each half. Now the second half here, begun in G major, extremely special. Hear this. Where are we? And this phrase here. That is unique music there. I love that phrase. Luckily, we'll hear it a second time. And the hemiola and G major, second half again. Okay, we're on the ground. Now we're lifted up. Up, up, up. And now he can deliver this final snappy figure at us. Go! We're back down on the ground. Okay, the saraband here. Very beautiful. I will use the slow pace of this movement to discuss one of the principal sources we have of this piece, which comes to us in a copy by a man named Johann Gottfried Walther. Its title, very interesting. It says Preludio con la suite. Suite of dances, but with the first prelude that we heard. Da Jo Bast Bach. Giobast Bach. That's the JS, we know. In this case, the GB. And then, interestingly enough, in another hand, below that, in a different color ink, you can see it quite clearly. Someone has scribbled Aufs lauten Werk. For the lute harpsichord. I wouldn't say speculation is pointless. It's certainly fun. It might not be conclusive, but the speculation there, at least my speculation there, is that already early in its transmission history, there was confusion as to the instrumentation, or at least the origin of this work, and someone knew the story and wrote, it's for the lute harpsichord. A very expressive saraband. We'll hear the end of the second half here repeated in E major back into B minor. And listen to this shift here. This. Now this piece, certainly the most famous on the record, maybe one of Bach's most famous pieces. How did that happen? I don't know how this piece became so famous, but there it is, and this is where we find it. This is the bourrée in the middle of this E minor lute suite. There is a funny anecdote about this piece, which is that McCartney was apparently practicing the first few bars on guitar. Couldn't go further. He himself says it goes down a rabbit hole. But while vamping on the first few bars, found the inspiration for the song Blackbird. I love that thought, that it was only a few bars, a few cells of this organism that generated that song. This is the jig. The jig is up. This is the last track on the album. I hope I've answered everyone's questions about the instrumentation, about this particular instrument, about the origins of these 4 original compositions for this unique instrument. This album was recorded on June 1st and June 2nd, 2023 in New York City at Yamaha Artists Services International on an instrument known as the Yamaha Reface. The engineer and the mixer was Aaron Ross. Special thanks to George Nixon, Beatrice Martin. And as always, a special thanks to you, the listener, for your constant support. Stay tuned for Volume 3.